What's up, everybody? It's been a few days. So just to quickly update some regular folks around here, I didn't post anything about the Switch 2 sales in Japan this week, because this week was a holiday in Japan, so they actually are not sharing the information until next week. So it's a good idea to keep your eyes open for next week, because I think they put out 2 weeks worth of data at the same time, if I'm not mistaken. So the numbers might look a little bit higher, but that's going to be divided by 2. Keep in mind that when we did get their last bit of data, which was a week ago, it was the Switch 2's lowest performing week in Japan. And based off of the minor digging around that I've done, it seems a lot easier to grab a Switch 2 now than it was a few weeks ago, but it's not quite as easy as it is to buy one as it is in the United States. So to kind of give you a feeling of what it's like in Japan at the moment, remember at the end of June and early July when I kept insisting that it's actually not that hard to get a Nintendo Switch 2, even if they're selling out as soon as they hit the shelves, or taking a few days to sell out? And everybody kept insisting that I was just being biased and I was just wrong and that this is going to be as it is for the remainder of the next 6 months. And I was using past experiences with older console launches of how long they were taking to sell out, or rather how much quicker they were selling out, and how much more money that scalpers were making off of those consoles. So at the end of June and the early July, I kept insisting that very soon we're going to be in a position where those consoles are going to be readily available in stock in the United States. And right exactly at the halfway point of July, until now, they have been completely in stock, and they are not selling out. Actually, let me caveat that. The only thing that has sold out is the base Switch 2 model that does not come in a bundle, but the bundles are aplenty. At this point, the Switch 2 might as well be considered a $500 console with Mario Kart World as a pack-in title, because for the most part, that's all you can really grab. Anyway, so Japan is currently at end of June, early July America style availability, which means by the time they get to September, I'm guessing that thing's going to be as available over there as it is over here. But despite that, the patterns of sales and the way that it's dropped down since it launched until now in Japan is less of a reflection of availability and more of a reflection of dwindling consumer interest, just like we saw over here through the end of June and early July. So what we got in the United States, and realistically this will be reflected later this month when we get the Circana data, is that there is going to be a very big push in numbers for the Switch 2 by the end of July. It shouldn't be anything groundbreaking. I'm guessing that the Switch 2 will cross that 2 million threshold because it's already at 1.6 million. If it hits closer to 2.5 million, I would be a little bit impressed, but I think realistically you're looking at 2.1, 2.2-ish million. And anything less than that, with the amount of availability that the Switch 2 has, I would say that means demand is completely satiated and it's much less than you should have expected, especially considering the console is still in its launch window and supposedly there was a lot of hype for this thing. And likewise, following that same trend in Japan in the end of August or early September, we should see something similar, where there's a big bump because that thing is going to be on shelves and it's just going to stay on shelves and it's going to completely level off after that. The question, of course, will be from September and onwards, if Nintendo ever actually announces anything, if Metroid Prime 4 ends up actually being a game that's coming out and not like Schrodinger's Metroid just trapped in a box. Does it exist? Does it not exist? Who knows? At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to come out and say that they completely scrapped the game and they have to start over again, just like they did with the Switch 1, because seemingly they want to do everything the exact same way they did it last time. Whatever the case is, unless there's like a groundbreaking announcement by Nintendo through the end of this year, I'm talking like a guaranteed new 3D Mario that's just knocking everybody's socks off. Unless there's that, the Switch 2 is definitely not going to be having a major shift from now through the end of the year. But we'll talk more sales numbers in the coming weeks. On the 21st, we'll get the next set of Famitsu numbers we can talk about. On the 27th, we'll get the July numbers for Circana. People are going to come in and talk about how the Switch has hit 2 million units, and they're going to be all celebrating and completely neglecting the fact that the Switch 2 basically stopped selling in August. And then right after that, in August 28th, we'll be able to talk about the next set of Famitsu numbers. In the meantime, I don't know how many videos I'll be getting out because I'm working on retrospectives for my other channel. I should have Banjo out next week, I think. My personal goal is Monday, but I don't know if I'm going to hit Monday. And shortly after that should be Donkey Kong 64. I've already finished playing both of those games, so I got the footage for both of them. It's just a matter of sitting down for, I don't know, 20 hours and finishing the videos. Anyway, so with that massive recap out of the way, there's been a lot of drama, a lot of headlines when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 and third parties, especially in the past week or so. So like you had Madden drop and everybody complained about how terrible it performed, so much so that Nintendo fans had to go online and start berating people that said they were unhappy with the performance. Borderlands 2 recently announced that there will not be a split screen mode in the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game, and people were pretty upset about that. And now after Microsoft promising that Call of Duty would be coming to the Nintendo Switch 2, they've seemingly completely backtracked on that, and Call of Duty will not be coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. At least not with the other consoles like Xbox had promised. And naturally what's happened is a lot of people have come out and they've said it's the fault of Nintendo because they have an inferior product. Like it's weaker hardware, right? You're looking at PS4 Pro, something that came out in 2016, and people are clapping about that like it's an amazing achievement. I mean, it's handheld, but it's also a home console, and at the home console experience, it is outdated. Now, normally when somebody comments about Nintendo's weaker hardware, and that's why it's not going to be getting the high-end third-party support that people had expected, even though they shouldn't have expected it because it is a Nintendo console, Nintendo fans will come out and immediately point to something like Cyberpunk or even Hogwarts Legacy, old and outdated games themselves, but people are considering them as if they came out a month ago. And then usually what they'll end up doing is talk about how something is able to run on the Steam Deck, so I don't understand why these devs can't get it to run on the Nintendo Switch 2. And this is actually part of a bigger problem that I have just not really been able to understand why people keep associating the Nintendo Switch 2 with handheld gaming PCs. When they talk about the price of the Switch 2, they compare it to the price of the Steam Deck, or even some of the more expensive higher-end models, like the ROG Ally or the Legion Go. Then they talk about the performance, and they're like, well, for this performance, you're getting an experience similar to that PC, which costs more. And I actually think this is very problematic for a multitude of reasons. Out of all of the handheld gaming devices available to play in 2025, and I'm talking like the mainline ones, not the cheaper Android stuff that you emulate a billion things on there. Like we're talking about, you know, like those top 8 or top 10 high-end handheld gaming devices that are all priced between $500 and $1,000. The only one of them that is actually a gaming device, and specifically only a gaming device, meaning it's not a multimedia device, or even more so, it's not a PC, is the Nintendo Switch 2. And there's an insistence upon people to compare it with handheld PCs, which creates a false equivalence where people start to assume that because it's priced the same amount as a Steam Deck, but the graphics on it are better than a Steam Deck, that they're comparable. But the Steam Deck is a PC, which means it's an open device that you can download pretty much anything you want on there. You can put whatever you want on there and you have no limitations. Whereas with the Switch 2, you are under Nintendo's rule. It's their gaming console. That's why the Switch 2 is considered an expensive handheld game console, or even a hybrid console rather. And the Steam Deck is considered the budget handheld gaming PC, and their prices converge. So the Steam Deck at $450 is considered a good deal. The Nintendo Switch 2 at $450 is considered a massive jump in price for what it's offering. Just because the Steam Deck has SteamOS running on it, so to you, when you hold it, it feels like a regular gaming console, it doesn't mean that it's not a multimedia device. And it's something that I think people have a very difficult time grasping onto. And it's kind of ignorant. I don't know if that's a right word to use here, but like I went and bought myself a PC, right? Because I needed one for YouTubing. Now, conveniently, I got a very strong PC because I'm like, I want to make sure this is long-term proof. I don't want to drop more money on one later, and I want to fill it up with games if I need to. But I need something strong because I YouTube. I make videos. So I spent a couple grand on a device because it took my rendering time for my videos from being an overnight thing into something that finishes within 10 minutes. But it's also a PC. I can run my emulators on there. I can access so many different types of game stores on there and download different games. It's a multi-purpose device. Like I can watch movies, I can stream things. Like, do I have to advertise what a PC is to people so they can understand the difference? And then people think I'm a hypocrite because I'm willing to spend $2,000 on a PC, but I'm not willing to spend $500 on a Nintendo Switch 2. And I'm just like, listen, I also bought a car that probably cost me around 35 grand. But if you told me to buy a mountain bike for $500, I'd think that was too expensive and I'd rather go buy one used from a garage sale. But in your mind, I feel like you think a car and a bicycle are the same thing when they're not. And mind you, Nintendo understands the difference between what their Switch 2 offers and what a handheld gaming PC is. They know the difference. They know what I'm saying. But they also understand that millions of Switch 2 buyers have a one-track mind. And when they look at it, they're just like, I can either buy this handheld thing for $450 or this Nintendo handheld for $450. And all of these different hybrid gaming PCs that came into the market actually caused the price of the Switch 2 to go up, not because the Switch 2 lives up to them as a PC, but because they expect that the average gamer to not understand the difference between a handheld PC and a gaming device. And I think based off of the many things I've seen online, Nintendo was actually right about this, because a lot of people are still convinced that the Switch 2 and the Steam Deck need to be compared. And until now, they don't understand why something is running on the Steam Deck but they won't bring it over to the Nintendo Switch 2. Just like they don't understand why a Steam Deck having 4 million sales is considered good, but a Nintendo handheld outselling it in its first month is not that impressive. The Steam Deck is a piece of the PC world. The Switch 2 is its own thing. When a game needs to come to the Nintendo Switch 2, it takes a lot of time and effort and resources and money in order to make sure that game comes to the Switch 2. You guys care about devs, right? You guys care about how much they have to put in and how much money they're making off of the games and how it's not worth their time, and that's your big defense for Nintendo for being as crappy as it is. So why would any third-party company waste so much extra effort and energy to get an inferior version of a game on the Nintendo Switch 2 for an audience that's realistically not even going to buy it? And even if they buy it, it's going to be like Cyberpunk numbers, which were impressive compared to third parties, but not even remotely impressive enough to be worth the effort that they put into it. Whereas they can just slightly tweak it and it works on the Steam Deck. Because the Steam Deck is not getting Steam Deck games, it's getting PC games. What runs on the Steam Deck is the same thing that's running on a laptop of equivalent power. What's running on the Switch 2 needs to be optimized for the Switch 2. So all of these third-party devs that you guys are hating on, they probably deserve hate, for the record. At least some of them do. Like, I'm not sitting here trying to be like, oh, EA is infallible and an amazing company. EA sucks, and Bowser came from EA and they hired him at Nintendo, so now Nintendo sucks too. But why are you giving the third-party companies so much hate for not bringing their games over to the Switch 2 when time and time again it has been shown that these games on the Nintendo Switch 2 are not worth the time and effort into optimizing them? Like back on the Switch 1, they brought in the older FIFA titles. They basically brought in the last gen version, and it was running at a steady frame rate and it was performing well, but it didn't have parity with the modern console. During that time, Nintendo fans kept complaining, saying they would want to have parity. They want to have the cross-platform high-end experience. They want it to be stronger and run like the other one, even if there's slight blemishes in the performance. Well, this time around, EA Sports is giving Nintendo fans the slight blemishes in performance, and they're giving them parity with the Xbox and PlayStation version. And instead, Nintendo fans are complaining because it's not hitting 60 frames per second, and they wish that they just gave them a last-gen version. The grass is always greener on the other side, and in both cases, it's not even that green at all because it doesn't sell well enough on the Switch 2 anyway for it to be worth anybody's time. Now, a lot of us have been very clear about this from April until now. I know I've just been saying it over and over again, and people are slowly starting to come around and understand the realization. Number one, it doesn't matter how powerful the Nintendo Switch 2 is, because third-party companies don't care about how strong the device is, they care about the bottom line, which is the money that they can make off of these devices after investing money into them initially. And it's off to a very bad start that is very reminiscent of what we saw in the last generation. So realistically speaking, we should expect that it's going to continue the same way the last generation did, because it's a Switch 2. We're doing the same thing over again. And the other thing is that this Switch 2 is not strong enough to be considered a high-end device. The PS5 came out 5 years ago, and it's not as strong as the PS5. Even from a third-party perspective, the PS4 Pro, realistically speaking, will run most games better than the Nintendo Switch 2 will, because it's easier to take the Sony version of a game and downsize it into the PS4 Pro than it is to build a from the ground up Switch 2 version of any game. Just like it's easier to take a game that runs phenomenally on a $3,000 PC and put it on the Steam Deck than it is to take a game from the Xbox and try to make it work on the Nintendo Switch 2. And you guys will see this more and more as time goes on. If people haven't already accepted that the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to have the same type of third-party life cycle that the Nintendo Switch 1 did, they're going to see it soon. Need I remind you that even early on in the Nintendo Switch 1's life, people were talking about Halo being on the go on the Nintendo Switch. And it's largely because we got like Minecraft and Cuphead. So everybody was like, oh, buddy with Microsoft. Now we're going to get a Banjo game. We're going to get a Halo trilogy on the Nintendo Switch because the Xbox came out 20 years ago, so it's clearly going to be able to run on the Switch 1. And all of these wild ideas of third parties that were going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch have now just carried on, and they're being said about the Nintendo Switch 2. I'm telling you guys, we are just doing the exact same thing over and over again. But the difference is this time around, it won't work because this time around, people have already done it before. It's not as exciting. And you know something? I was looking at my older prediction video right before the Switch 2 came out, and I had actually insisted that the Switch 2 will realistically hit roughly 50 million units sold worldwide if they were to change nothing. If they were just basically to go with the Switch 2 as it currently is right now. Same price, same BS from Nintendo, all that stuff. And I was surprised that I said 50 million because I've been saying that I think at most it would hit 30 million for the past month or so. So when I went back to watch the video, I was like, I want to see the part where I say 30 million so I can adjust my assumption, because I think it's actually going to be less than 30 million now. And I'm saying that because it's very clear that the demand for the Switch 2 has massively dropped off. It's slowing down at an unprecedented rate. And I'm not even talking about it based off of the timeline. I'm talking about it based off of the amount of units that are sold. With 6 million units sold around the entire world and less than 2 million sold in the United States, these things are sitting on shelves. I was talking about PS5, right? I was saying that if there were 2 million PS5s sold and PS5s dropped anywhere or they were available anywhere in stores, that there's no chance in heck those things would last more than 5 seconds and they would end up getting scalped and being sold for almost double the price because they were products that were actually in massive demand. And I realize I'm sitting here comparing it to the PS5, but that's not even a competition at this point. The Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S were both still getting scalped for almost double the value. We're still getting picked off and sold immediately for almost double the value during a time where they still had sold fewer than 10 million units. And yet you want to tell me that there are 1.6 to 2 million to 2.5 million, whatever the number is at right now, Switch 2s that are sold in America, and the demand has been so satiated that they are actually remaining on shelves. Before, they were getting sold and then coming back onto the shelves. But at this point, there are the same number of Switch 2s available today as there were like a week ago. And trust me, I know, because I have been obsessively following it along. I've been looking at the local stores. I've been seeing how many units they have on stock, what it says online. I've been looking at zip codes all around the country because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just the city that I lived in. And my city was a very scalp-hungry city. So I felt it was a good example, but I wanted to check around the country anyway. A lot of these stores were selling 7 to 10 units over a span of a week, only a few weeks ago. Now I'm noticing that it says 7 in stock on Monday, and on Wednesday it says 6 in stock. And I straight up drove to some of these stores and asked them specifically. I was going to buy groceries or something anyway, so it's not like I was just going there for the sake of going there to ask. But you know, I gotta do my due diligence. And almost every single one of them said they had a massive bump when the console first launched. They had a minor bump around the time where mid-July, where DK Bonanza came out basically, and August has been worryingly slow. And obviously, it's because demand has been satiated, at least in America. And when America counts for 1/3 of your sales, that is a big deal. You guys have seen everybody talking about how all of the Switch 1 prices have been pushed back from retailers. That was like the big thing that people were chasing online to get clicks for a span of like 10 days. Just FYI, even Target now, which initially was doing the same price as Nintendo, has also lowered all of their prices back to what they were before the price increases. And the reason these stores are doing that is because retailers get to set their prices. That's why you see a lot of places have Bonanza for cheaper than it actually is. That's why you see a lot of places have discounts on Pro controllers. Because the retailers already bought it from Nintendo, and they're allowed to drop prices on things that they bought from Nintendo and they want to sell on to you. So even if Nintendo goes around and is all sneaky like and increases the prices of their stuff, the retailer will price things based off of what they're worth, because they want to move things off shelves. And if they can do that for the games, they can do that for the accessories, they can do it for the controllers, they can do it for the Switch 1 stuff. That means they can also do it for the Switch 2s. So even if Nintendo does not officially announce a price drop, there's a very big chance that by the time Black Friday comes around, unless, like I said, Nintendo comes out and announces something massive and groundbreaking, there's a very big chance that these retailers are now going to decrease the price of the Switch 2 units themselves because they're no longer moving along. My guess is Black Friday, maybe a Christmas deal, maybe some bundles being offered, not sure. But so far, this is all moving in almost the exact pattern that I've been predicting since April. And it's not because I want to be right. Let's get to something very straight, actually. It's not because I think that people doing a backlash online are the reason this thing is going to fail. From day one, I said that Nintendo was playing with fire by charging the prices that they were charging, and as a result, the market will not take well to it, and I was upset because I was enjoying Nintendo being on top with the Switch 1. Nintendo is doing this to themselves. Nobody else is to blame. They did it to themselves when they decided they were going to be the greediest company of 2025.
you.